All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Evelyn, short order cook. The grease fires from the griddle were my constant companions, their fleeting, hot tongues a familiar dance. The smell of sizzling patties and fried onions had seeped into my skin, a permanent perfume of my existence. For 12 years, my world had been defined by the four walls of Mel's Diner and the four walls of the small, clapboard house I shared with Daniel. My hands, scarred with tiny burns, were skilled at flipping eggs and calming our daughter's nightmares, but they felt useless at shaping the grand design of my own life. I was a short-order cook in a life that felt pre-ordered, the menu never changing. And I had made peace with that. I had made peace with the quiet, with the predictable, with the way Daniel's love felt like a comfortable, worn-out sweater, warm, but lacking any spark. I had forgiven him. That was the thought that echoed in my head, a mantra of my own perceived strength. 2 years ago, a business trip to a cheese convention in Milwaukee had ended with a drunken, tearful confession. A one-night stand. A stranger, a meaningless mistake in a haze of alcohol, and, as he claimed, profound insecurity. The ground had fallen away from me then. I had left, taken our daughter, and for 3 months I had breathed the sharp, clean air of independence. But he wore me down, not with grand gestures, but with a relentless, desperate love. He became the man I'd always wanted, attentive, transparent, present. He looked at me as if I were the only star in his sky. I took him back, and the love that grew from the ashes of that betrayal was fiercer, more profound than anything before. I was proud of myself for forgiving him. I believed our story was one of redemption, a testament to the resilience of love. That belief shattered at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was on the couch, my body aching from a double shift, my mind numbly scrolling through a streaming service. My iPad was propped on my knees. Daniel was in the shower, the sound of the water a distant roar. A flicker of movement on the screen, a notification from his Apple Watch. Daniel's watch, iMessage to unknown, can't stop thinking about you. Last night was fuck. I'm hard just thinking about it. The words hung in the air, black and venomous against the bright screen. I froze, my breath trapped in my lungs. The world didn't slow down, it violently stopped, the axis tilting off its foundation. Another message. Daniel's watch, iMessage to unknown, the way you tasted. I need to see you again. Tomorrow, the usual place? A sound escaped me, a strangled, guttural thing that was more animal than human. My hands, usually so steady with a spatula, trembled so violently the iPad clattered to the floor. The shower was still running. The steam seeped under the bathroom door, a ghost of his presence. He flinched when I touched his phone. The memory, a tiny, ignored splinter from a week ago, now exploded into a searing shard of truth. I had reached for his phone to show him a picture of our daughter, and he had jerked it away as if my touch were acid. "Sorry, habit," he'd mumbled, and I, the fool, the proud, forgiving fool, had smiled and let it go. I scrambled for the iPad, my fingers slipping on the cool glass. I opened the message thread. It wasn't a thread. It was a crime scene, photos. Blurry, intimate, devastating. A woman's thigh. The curve of her back in a dimly lit room that was not our bedroom. His words, so much more vulgar and passionate than anything he'd said to me in years. This wasn't a one-time drunken mistake. This was a language, a secret, sordid world he had been building while I was busy congratulating myself on our beautiful, rebuilt marriage. The shower stopped. The silence that followed was more deafening than the water. I heard the shower curtain rasp back, his footsteps on the bath mat. I stood up, the iPad held in my hands like a sacrificial offering. My heart wasn't breaking. It was calcifying, turning to stone in my chest. He walked out, a towel around his waist, his skin pink from the hot water. He saw my face. He saw the iPad in my hands. His own face, open and relaxed moments before, collapsed. The color drained from it, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. "Evie," he whispered, his voice a hoarse plea. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The emotion was too vast, too cataclysmic for sound. It was a silent, internal detonation that vaporized every memory, every promise, every "I love you" of the last 2 years. "Who is she?" My voice was flat, cold, alien to my own ears. "Baby, it's not what you think." He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Don't." The word was a shard of ice. "Don't you dare call me that. Don't you dare touch me. Who is she?" He crumpled, fell to his knees right there on the hallway carpet, his hands covering his face. It's no one, it's stupid." Stupid? I let out a laugh that was sharp and brittle. This is a masterpiece of betrayal, Daniel. This is careful, calculated. You synced your watch to my iPad. You were so brazen, so sure of yourself, you didn't even think to check. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had built a life with, this man I had forgiven. And I saw a stranger, a pathetic, weeping stranger on the floor. "The usual place?" I continued, the words dripping with a poison I didn't know I possessed. "How many times? How long have you been laughing at me? The stupid little cook who believed your lies." He was sobbing now, incoherent apologies, promises, excuses bubbling out of him. "I love you, Evie, I swear, it's you I love." It was a moment of weakness, it didn't mean anything. I walked towards him. I didn't feel my feet moving. I felt like I was hovering above the scene, watching a play. I stopped in front of him, looking down at his hunched form. The love I had felt for him was gone. In its place was a vast, howling emptiness, and at the very core of that emptiness, a single, glowing ember of pure, undiluted rage. I dropped the iPad onto the carpet beside him. "It meant something to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through his sobs. "It meant the end." I turned and walked away. I went to our daughter's room, checked that she was sleeping peacefully, untouched by the cataclysm in the hallway. Then I walked into our bedroom, to the closet, and I pulled out my old suitcase. I started packing. Not for him, not for us. For me. Each item of clothing I folded was a brick in the wall I was building between my old life and whatever was to come. The ember inside me glowed hotter. This wasn't a heartbreak. This was an awakening, and it was going to be loud. The sound that came out of me as I dragged that monstrosity of fabric and wood through the dewy grass wasn't a sob or a scream. It was a grunt, a raw, physical expulsion of effort and fury. It was 3 a.m. The world was a still life painted in shades of blue and black, the only sounds the distant hum of a lone car on the highway and the screech of the chair's metal legs against the concrete path. Daniel's chair. His throne. The La-Z-Boy recliner he'd saved for 6 months to buy, the one he'd nestle into every night after his shift at the cheese factory. The fabric now permanently imprinted with the shape of his body, the ghost of his beer and his weariness. After I had walked away from him weeping in the hallway, after I had packed a single suitcase with mine and Chloe's essentials, after I had called my cousin Maria, my voice terrifyingly steady, and asked for her couch for a few nights, I had stood in the dark of the living room. The suitcase was by the door. Chloe was asleep in the car, wrapped in a blanket, mercifully unaware that her world had been atomized. And I was left with the silence of the house and the crushing weight of what to do next. My eyes had fallen on the chair. It was more than furniture. It was a symbol. It was the place he'd sat when he told me he loved me for the first time, nervous and sweet. It was the place he'd rocked our colicky daughter for hours, his eyes heavy with sleep. It was also the place he'd sat, night after night, while he was meticulously crafting his digital lies to another woman, his fingers tapping out filth on his phone while I thought he was watching the game. The chair had witnessed it all. It was a co-conspirator. It held the scent of his betrayal deep within its fibers. I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't let it remain in this house, this temple of our broken faith, waiting for him to come back and sulk into its embrace, to perhaps one day entertain her in it. The thought was a physical revulsion, a wave of nausea so potent it straightened my spine. So I went back inside. I didn't look at Daniel, who was still a weeping heap on the floor. I walked straight to the garage, found the old, rusted hand truck he used for moving kegs when he'd home-brewed beer, a hobby he'd abandoned years ago, another half-finished dream. I maneuvered the hand truck under the chair. It was heavier than I expected, a behemoth of complacency. Strapping it in was a battle. The levered footrest fought me, springing open and hitting my shin with a painful thud. I welcomed the pain. It was clean, honest, unlike the searing, complex agony in my chest. Then I pulled. Out the front door, down the 2 concrete steps with a jarring bang-bang, across the patchy lawn. The wheels dug into the soft earth, and I had to put my entire body weight into it, my shoulder muscles, strengthened by years of hauling cases of frozen patties and sacks of potatoes, screaming in protest. This was a different kind of labor. This was exorcism. I reached the center of the backyard, a place where Chloe's inflatable pool usually sat in the summer. Now it was just a bald patch of earth. This was the spot. I unstrapped the chair. It sat there, ugly and out of place under the vast, indifferent tapestry of stars. For a moment, I just stood, chest heaving, sweat cooling on my forehead despite the chill. What was I doing? This was insane. This was the action of a hysterical woman. The thought, however, was quickly smothered by a louder, more primal one. This is the action of a woman who is finally done being polite. I went back to the garage. The gasoline can was right where it always was, next to the lawnmower. The smell of it was sharp and industrial as I carried it back. I didn't hesitate. I unscrewed the cap and doused the chair. The liquid soaked into the fabric, darkening the beige pattern, dripping onto the soil with a soft patter. The smell mixed with the night air, creating a toxic, promising perfume. I pulled the box of matches from my pocket, the ones we used to light birthday candles and the pilot light on the stove. My hands were steady. Eerily, impossibly steady. I struck a match. The flare was blinding in the darkness. For a heartbeat, I held it, watching the tiny flame dance at the tip of the wood. I saw our entire life together reflected in that miniature fire, the hope, the drudgery, the betrayal, the forgiveness, the even greater betrayal. Then I tossed it. The whump was a physical force, a wave of heat that pushed me back a step. The chair erupted, flames roaring to life, climbing the fabric, greedily consuming the foam and the wood frame. The light was immense, a false, violent dawn that painted the fences, the trees, my face in flickering oranges and reds. The heat was purifying. I stood my ground, letting it bake into my skin, the intense dryness a counterpoint to the tears I refused to shed. This wasn't just about destroying a chair. This was a ritual. I was burning his comfort. I was burning his entitlement. I was burning the ghost of the man I thought he was, the man I had forgiven. The flames were devouring the very site of his infidelity, turning his throne into a pyre for my naivety. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the metal framework to become visible, a glowing, skeletal remains amidst the flames. Long enough for the sound of a siren to begin wailing in the distance, growing closer. A neighbor must have seen the fire. A police car pulled up, lights flashing, painting the scene in alternating red and blue. An officer got out, his posture cautious. "Ma'am, is everything all right here?" I turned to look at him, my face illuminated by the dying fire. I must have been a sight, hair wild, eyes blazing with reflected fire, standing alone in my backyard at 3 a.m. before a burning recliner. "Everything," I said, my voice hoarse from smoke and emotion, but clear and firm, "is now just beginning to be all right." He looked from me to the smoldering wreckage, then back at me. He opened his mouth, perhaps to ask a question, to chastise me, but then he seemed to think better of it. He just gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "You need to douse those embers, ma'am. We don't want a grass fire." "I will," I said. He got back in his car and drove away. The spectacle was over. The flames had subsided into a heap of glowing coals and blackened metal. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt plastic and dreams. I went inside, filled a bucket with water, and carried it out to pour over the remains. The water hissed and steamed, the final death rattle of the thing. As I stood over the sizzling, blackened mess, I felt it. Not happiness, not relief, but a profound, seismic shift. The ground had settled beneath my feet, but it was new, unfamiliar ground. I had taken something he loved and I had destroyed it. It was a violent, perhaps unreasonable act, but it was my act. For the first time in years, I had not reacted. I had initiated. I had created chaos on my own terms. I walked back to the car where Chloe still slept. I got in the driver's seat, the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes. I looked at my daughter's peaceful face in the rearview mirror, then I started the engine. I was driving away from the ashes of my old life. And the first thing I was going to do when the sun came up was buy an electric guitar. The first time I plugged the guitar in, I blew a fuse. The entire apartment went dark with a definitive pop, plunging Chloe's new room and the cramped living room into silence, abruptly cutting off the low, menacing hum that had been emanating from the amplifier. My cousin Maria's voice came from the hallway, laced with a sleep-deprived sigh. "Evie, everything okay in there?" "Fine," I chirped, my voice too bright, too false for the hour. "Just figuring out the volume?" I stood in the darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. For 2 weeks, my life had been a study in controlled chaos. My days were a frantic ballet at the diner, flipping burgers, slinging hash, forcing smiles for tips. A desperate attempt to maintain normalcy for Chloe, who was now asking in a small, confused voice when Daddy was coming to see our new vacation house. My nights were spent here, in this borrowed box of an apartment, surrounded by the ghost of my old life and the screaming silence of my new one. The guitar had been an impulse buy, a direct result of the inferno in my backyard. It was a solid, used Fender Stratocaster, a sleek black thing that felt both alien and powerful in my hands. The amp was a small, second-hand cube that promised earth-shattering distortion. I wasn't trying to become a rock star. I was trying to become someone who could make a noise louder than the one in my own head, the relentless, looping tape of Daniel's messages, his sobs, the sound of that chair burning. I fumbled my way to the fuse box in the hallway, reset the switch. The lights flickered back on, harsh and unforgiving. The amplifier's red power light glowed like a malevolent eye. I picked up the guitar again. The neck was too wide for my hands, the steel strings biting into the soft pads of my fingertips, which were already calloused from grill burns and cleaning solvents. It was a different kind of pain. A chosen pain. I hadn't bothered with lessons, with books, with any of the sensible steps. Sensibility was a language I no longer spoke. I positioned my fingers on the fretboard randomly, copying a stance I'd seen in music videos. I strummed. The sound was catastrophic. A jarring, dissonant crash that was less a chord and more a physical assault. It was the sound of shattering glass, of tearing metal, of a heart cracking into a million irreparable pieces. It was perfect. I did it again. And again. My strumming was clumsy, all arm and no wrist, a violent sawing motion. The noise filled the small apartment, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the cheap framed print of a generic sunflower on the wall. It was feedback, it was discord, it was chaos. And it was mine. Every ugly, screaming note was a translation of the emotion I had to keep bottled up all day. This was the sound of my rage, my humiliation, my grief. I couldn't scream in the diner. I couldn't cry in front of Chloe. But here, at 2 a.m., I could make the amplifier weep and snarl for me. I played until my fingers were raw and throbbing, until the tips were stained pink with blood from the strings. I played until the downstairs neighbor thumped on his ceiling with what I imagined was a broomstick. I played until I was drenched in a sweat that had nothing to do with a hot griddle, my muscles trembling with a new, unfamiliar exhaustion. And when I finally unplugged the guitar, the silence that rushed back in was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was spent. It was respectful. This became my new ritual. After putting Chloe to bed, after washing the smell of grease from my skin, I would stand in the center of the living room, plug in the Black Beast, and exorcise my demons through a wall of noise. I wasn't learning to play music. I was learning to weaponize sound. The clumsy, powerful chords were my battle cries. The shrieking feedback was the sound of my sanity being stretched to its absolute limit, but holding, miraculously holding. One Tuesday night, about a month into my oral self-flagellation, I was attempting something new, pressing a single finger down on the thickest string and dragging the pick across it. It produced a low, guttural, monstrous note that shook the windows. I did it again, lost in the primal simplicity of it. Thrum, thrum, thrum. A new sound pierced through the vibration, not a thump from below, a knock at the door. Sharp, insistent. My blood ran cold. Daniel, he'd found us. He'd come to take Chloe, to explain, to beg, to shatter my fragile new world. The guitar felt suddenly heavy, a useless piece of wood in my hands. I considered not answering, pretending I was asleep. The knock came again, more forceful this time. Setting the guitar carefully in its stand, I walked to the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see his tortured, familiar face. It wasn't Daniel. A man stood there, maybe a few years older than me. He was tall, with the kind of shoulders that came from actual labor, not a gym. He wore a dark Henley shirt and jeans, and he had a weary, slightly amused expression on his face, like he'd just been woken from a deep sleep. He held a cardboard box in his hands. He was attractive. The thought entered my mind unbidden, a startling, irrelevant observation in the midst of my panic. I opened the door a crack, the chain lock still on. Yes. Hi, he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. I'm sorry to bother you so late. I'm Alex. I'm, managing the office renovation next door for the next few weeks. He gestured vaguely down the hall. We've been storing some of the less sensitive materials in the vacant unit across from you. I left a box of blueprints here earlier, and I need them for tomorrow morning. He hefted the box in his hands slightly. Landlord gave me a key, but he said you might be in. Didn't expect a private concert. Heat flooded my cheeks. I'm so sorry. The noise, my daughter's asleep. I didn't think the walls were that thin. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. The walls are fine. The floor, however, seems to be conducting the vibrations straight into my temporal lobe. It's okay. Really, I was just working late. He looked past me, into the living room, and his eyes landed on the black guitar standing proudly in the center of the room. A fellow enthusiast, though your style is a bit more aggressive than my usual. I didn't know what to say. I was still braced for a confrontation with my husband, and instead I was being politely chided by a handsome architect with a nice voice about my terrible guitar playing. I'm learning, I said lamely, the chain lock still between us, a literal and metaphorical barrier. I can tell, he said, and the way he said it wasn't mocking. It was observant. The raw power is there. The finesse, maybe, needs a little work. He shifted his weight. Look, I don't want to intrude, I just need to grab my blueprints. And maybe, he hesitated, his eyes flicking back to the guitar. Maybe consider investing in a pair of headphones. They make adapters for amps. For the sake of international peace and your downstairs neighbor's blood pressure. Headphones. The idea was so simple, so logical, it was dizzying. In my single-minded pursuit of catharsis, it had never occurred to me. I'd been so focused on being loud, on being heard, that I'd forgotten other people existed in their own bubbles of silence. I'll do that, I managed to say, my face still burning. I'm sorry I disturbed you. Don't be, he said softly. His gaze was direct but not intrusive. It felt like he was seeing me, Evelyn, the woman with the raw fingertips and the screaming amplifier, not just the short-order cook or the betrayed wife. Sometimes, a little disturbance is exactly what we need. He gave me a final, small nod, then turned and walked down the hall to the vacant unit, letting himself in. I closed the door slowly, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. The frantic fear was gone, replaced by a bewildering, quiet flutter. The echo of his words hung in the air. A little disturbance is exactly what we need. I looked at the guitar, then at my bleeding fingers. For the first time since I'd picked it up, the noise I'd been making felt less like a weapon and more like a cry for help. And for the first time since Daniel's betrayal, someone had heard it. Not the noise, but the cry. The diner was my anchor, my purgatory. The hiss of the grill, the clatter of plates, the constant, low-grade anxiety of the lunch rush. It was a symphony of monotony that kept the haunting silence of my new life at bay. For weeks, I moved through it like a ghost, my body performing its well-rehearsed duties while my mind replayed its toxic loops. The burning chair, the raw fingertips, the calm, observant face of Alex at my door. His suggestion about the headphones had been a pinprick of light in my self-imposed darkness. I'd bought the adapter the next day, a cheap, plastic thing that felt like a surrender. That night, I plugged it in, the cord a tether between my turmoil and the outside world. The first chord I played was swallowed by the headphones, a violent explosion contained within the tiny foam pads pressed against my ears. It was infuriating. The sound was immediate, personal, trapped inside my skull with nowhere to go. It felt like screaming into a pillow. I missed the physicality of the noise, the way it vibrated in my chest and shook the walls. This was quiet, but quiet, I was slowly learning, had its own lessons to teach. Without the cathartic release of volume, I was forced to actually listen to what I was playing. And what I was playing was awful. It was all force and no direction. The silence in the apartment, once I took the headphones off, felt deeper, more profound. It was no longer something to be fought, but something to be inhabited. This new, quieter rebellion coincided with the start of the office renovation next door. The sounds of drilling, sawing, and male voices became the soundtrack to my days off. Every thud and whir was a reminder of the man with the weary smile. I found myself listening for his voice, a low, steady murmur that stood out from the others. I'd see him in the hallway sometimes, carrying rolls of plans or talking on his phone. We'd exchange brief, polite nods. Evelyn, Alex, nothing more. But his eyes always held that same look, not pity, not judgment, but a simple, acknowledging recognition. He saw the guitar case in my hand once and gave a slight, approving smile. "Getting any sleep down there yet?" he'd asked. "Working on it," I'd replied, and for the first time, it felt like the truth. One Wednesday, the diner was dead. A slow, drizzling rain had kept the customers away, and I was left with too much time to wipe already clean counters and stare out the window at the wet, gray street. My manager, a kind but perpetually harried woman named Brenda, came over to me, her expression unreadable. "Evelyn, honey," she started, leaning against the counter. "I got a call. It was Daniel." The name was a bucket of ice water. My whole body went rigid. What did he want? He was asking about your schedule, said he needed to talk to you to see Chloe. He sounded desperate. She looked at me, her eyes full of sympathy I didn't want. "I didn't tell him anything, of course, but you should know, he's looking for you." The carefully constructed walls of my new life felt suddenly thin, permeable. He was out there, circling, a shark smelling blood in the water. The peace I'd been fighting for felt fragile, illusory. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of suppressed panic. The familiar greasy smell of the diner, which usually felt like a shield, now felt suffocating. It was the smell of my old life, and it was trying to pull me back in. When my shift finally ended, I walked out into the damp evening air, the weight of Brenda's words crushing me. I didn't want to go back to the apartment, to the silence that now felt threatening. I stood under the diner's awning, watching the rain, feeling utterly, completely alone. "Rough day," the voice came from my left. I turned. Alex was standing there, holding a takeout coffee, his collar turned up against the drizzle. He had a smudge of dust on his cheek and looked tired, but his gaze was as steady as ever. "You could say that," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He nodded, as if my tone confirmed something. "I'm about to call it a day next door. The project's a mess." The client changed their mind about the load-bearing wall. Again, he rolled his eyes, a gesture so normal, so mundanely frustrated that it was oddly grounding. "Sometimes you just need to walk away from the blueprint for a minute." I looked at him, this practical, solid man who dealt with tangible problems, walls, beams, measurements. My problems were ghosts and echoes and digital betrayals. The contrast was so stark it was almost funny. "A blueprint sounds nice," I found myself saying. "Something you can actually fix." He studied me for a long moment, the rain pattering softly on the awning above us. "It's not so different," he said quietly. "You look at what's broken, you see what can be salvaged, you design something new, something stronger from the foundation up." He gestured with his coffee cup down the street. "I'm going to go clear my head. You look like you could use it too. Join me?" It wasn't a flirtatious offer. It was a simple, human one, an offer of companionship from one tired person to another. And in that moment, drowning in the fear of Daniel's reemergence, it felt like a lifeline. I fell into step beside him. We walked in silence for a block, the rhythm of our footsteps and the rain the only sounds. The tension in my shoulders began to ease just a fraction. "So," he said finally, his voice cutting through the quiet. "The client from hell or the contractor?" I let out a short, surprised breath that was almost a laugh. "The foundation was rotten," I said, the metaphor slipping out before I could stop it. "I just didn't know it. Now I have to figure out how to build on top of it without the whole thing collapsing." He didn't press. He just nodded. "The first step is always the site survey. Assessing the damage. You can't design a solution until you know the full extent of the problem." We walked past a small electronics store, its window filled with televisions all playing the same movie, a chaotic, brightly colored scene from the 80s. Alex stopped, a genuine grin spreading across his face. "Ah, Buckaroo Banzai," he said, pointing. "No matter where you go, there you are." I stared at him. "What?" he chuckled. "It's a line from the movie, a terrible, wonderful movie. Peter Weller, John Lithgow, alien invaders from the 8th dimension. It's a masterpiece of nonsense." He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've never seen it?" "I know, I don't think so." He shook his head in mock despair. "A cultural tragedy. That's it. My professional opinion as your architectural and spiritual advisor is that your new foundation requires a proper education in cinematic cheese." He said it with such deadpan seriousness that I couldn't help but smile. A real, unforced smile that felt strange on my face. In that moment, walking in the rain with a man who quoted bad 80s movies, the terror of Daniel's phone call receded. It was still there, a dark shape on the horizon, but it wasn't all-consuming. Alex hadn't tried to solve my problems. He hadn't offered empty platitudes. He had simply offered a walk and a shared, silly moment. He was showing me, without ever saying it, that a new blueprint was possible. And that the first line you draw on it didn't have to be a wall. It could be a joke from a movie nobody else remembered. The cardboard box sat on my kitchen counter like a bomb, its mundane contents capable of leveling the fragile piece I'd built. It was delivered by a scowling courier, no return address, but I knew. The sheer, brutal familiarity of Daniel's scrawl on the label, just my name, Evelyn, written with an aggressive slant, was enough to make my hands tremble. Brenda must have finally cracked and given him my address. The walls of my apartment, which had started to feel like a sanctuary, suddenly felt like tissue paper. I didn't open it, not for hours. I made coffee I didn't drink. I watched Chloe draw sprawling, happy pictures with crayons, her world still blissfully intact. I picked up my guitar, the headphones now a permanent fixture, and played a single, distorted chord that vibrated through my bones. It didn't help. The box was a silence louder than any noise I could make. It was a container of ghosts. I knew it without looking. The sweater I'd left behind in my rushed exit. The book of poetry he'd given me on our first anniversary. Photographs. It was a Trojan horse of nostalgia, sent to soften my resolve, to remind me of the good times, and make me question the scorched earth I'd left behind. My first instinct was to take it to the dumpster, unopened, to treat it with the same finality as his chair. But a colder, more rational thought surfaced. You look at what's broken, you see what can be salvaged. Alex's words about architecture felt applicable to this emotional demolition site. A site survey. I had to know what was in the box. I had to assess the damage, inventory the weapons he was using against me. With a deep, steadying breath, I sliced the tape with a kitchen knife. I was right. It was a curated museum of our past. On top lay a framed photo from our honeymoon in Seattle, both of us young, drenched, and laughing under the Space Needle. Beneath that, the sweater. Then, the book. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it. I didn't touch the photo. I didn't unfold the sweater. I left the book closed, but I picked up the envelope. My hands were steady. The calcified heart in my chest felt like a stone. I opened it. Evie, it began. The old pet name was a calculated blow, but it landed on armor. I know you don't want to see me. I know you don't want to talk. I'm respecting that, but I can't respect this silence forever. We built 12 years. We have a daughter. You can't just throw that away because of one mistake. One mistake. The phrase was so dismissive, so utterly lacking in the gravity of what he'd done, that a bitter laugh escaped my lips. The digital affair, the photos, the planning, it was all reduced to a mistake, like spilling milk. I'm getting help, the letter continued. Therapy, I'm a broken man, Evie. I'm lost without you and Chloe. This box, these are just reminders of who we really are. The real us. Not the people in those horrible messages. That wasn't me. That was a ghost. Let me see Chloe. Let me talk to you. We can fix this. We have to fix this. I love you. I always will. Daniel, the words were a masterclass in manipulative language, taking responsibility while simultaneously minimizing the crime, appealing to my compassion by painting himself as the broken one, using our daughter as a bargaining chip. The ghost of the man I'd loved would have known how deeply this would wound me. This man, this stranger, knew exactly how to twist the knife. I felt the pull, the seductive, toxic lure of it, the easy path, to forgive, to fall back into the familiar rhythm, even if it was a lie, to spare Chloe the pain of a fractured family. The weight of it was immense, a physical pressure on my chest. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper, blurring the ink of his signature. I sank to the kitchen floor, the letter clutched in my hand, the cardboard box looming over me like a judgment. I was losing. The battle I thought I'd won in the backyard was just the first skirmish. A soft knock at the door startled me. I scrambled to my feet, hastily wiping my face. It couldn't be him. He wouldn't knock. I looked through the peephole. Alex. He held a small, rectangular box, a pizza, and a DVD case. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held a quiet question. I unlocked the door, opening it just enough to reveal my puffy, tear-stained face. I didn't have the energy to pretend. "Bad day on the site?" I asked, my voice thick. "The worst," he said, his gaze flicking past me to the open cardboard box on the counter, the contents spilling out like guts. His eyes returned to mine, and he didn't flinch from what he saw there. I brought reinforcements. Carbs and cinematic comfort. He lifted the pizza box and the DVD. I saw the cover, Buckaroo Bands. He hadn't asked what was wrong. He hadn't offered empty sympathy. He had simply arrived, armed with the two things he intuitively knew I needed: sustenance and a distraction so absurd it would leave no room for my own pain. I let him in. We didn't talk about the box. We ate pizza on the floor of my living room, cross-legged like teenagers, while the glorious, incomprehensible nonsense of the movie filled the space. Alex provided a running commentary, quoting the terrible lines with reverent gusto. "Remember, no matter where you go, there you are," he said solemnly during a scene change, and for the first time that day, I laughed. A real, unforced laugh that felt like breaking a fever. Chloe, woken by the noise, padded out and curled up in my lap, her eyes wide at the bright colors and strange creatures. Alex, without missing a beat, leaned over and whispered a simplified, silly explanation of the plot to her, making her giggle. In that moment, surrounded by the debris of my past and the simple, present-tense reality of pizza, a bad movie, and my daughter's laughter, I saw the two blueprints of my life laid out side by side. One was Daniel's, a blueprint for a prison of the past, built on a foundation of lies and painted with the colors of guilt and obligation. It was a design I knew intimately, a house I had already escaped. The other was hazy, still under construction. But its foundation was this: a man who made me laugh without demanding anything in return. A shared, silly movie. The piece of a quiet evening that wasn't filled with tension or the fear of a buzzing phone. It was a design for a future, not a restoration of a ruin. When the movie ended and Chloe was back in bed, Alex gathered the pizza box and the DVD. He paused at the door, his eyes falling on the cardboard box one last time. "You know," he said softly, "in my line of work, you learn that some structures are too compromised to save. The foundation is shot, the load-bearing walls are rotten. The only safe thing to do is to demolish it completely. It's not a failure, it's a necessary step to build something new that won't collapse on your head." He looked at me, his gaze steady and sure. "You're the architect now, Evelyn." After he left, I picked up Daniel's letter. I read it one more time. Then I walked to the kitchen, struck a match, and held the flame to the corner of the paper. I watched his words, his pleas, his manipulations, turn to black ash and curl into nothingness in my sink. I didn't burn the rest of the box. That would be giving it too much power. Instead, I closed the flaps and shoved it into the back of my closet. It was just a box of old things. It had no power over the new blueprint I was now drawing. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint had become the smell of possibility. With the office renovation finished, Alex's physical presence in my daily life should have ended. But it didn't. It had simply changed form, shifting from the professional to the personal with a quiet, unforced ease that felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. Our interactions were no longer confined to rainy walks under awnings or bad movie nights on my floor. They now existed in a new, shared space of deliberate construction. It started with a text, a picture he sent of a flat-pack box of ludicrous proportions. The label showed a sleek, modern bookshelf. "Alex, client from hell, the furniture company, delivered. They claim it fosters character building. I'm offering a 50/50 partnership in this character-building enterprise. I provide the muscle, you provide the advanced spatial reasoning. And possibly coffee." I stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was a world away from Daniel's manipulative, guilt-tripping letters. This was an invitation to shared frustration, to a collaborative puzzle. It was light. It was fun. "Evelyn, I'm a short-order cook, not an engineer, but I can follow a pictogram with the best of them, and I make strong coffee." Terms accepted. An hour later, he was in my living room, the massive box dominating the space. Chloe was ecstatic, immediately commandeering the cardboard as a new fort. The air was filled with the sound of tearing plastic and the rustle of what seemed like 1,000 particle board pieces. The instructions were, as promised, a masterpiece of absurdity. A single, multilingual sheet of paper covered in cryptic, line-drawn diagrams that seemed to suggest physically impossible configurations. "Okay," Alex said, scratching his head, a lock of hair falling over his forehead. "Step 1. It says to identify component egget. We have components named after Swedish eggs?" I asked, sorting through a pile of cam locks and dowels. "Apparently." He held up a small, unidentifiable plastic piece. "Is this an egget, or is this a blama? I feel like I'm assembling furniture in the land of Vikings and meatballs." We tried. We really did. We laid out the pieces according to the diagram, which resembled a map to a hidden treasure more than a construction guide. We attached board A to board B, only to realize 3 steps later that we had used the wrong type of screw, and the entire structure was now lopsided. "Wait, stop," I said, laughter bubbling up in my chest as the supposed bookshelf leaned precariously to the left. "This can't be right. It looks like it's drunk." "It's not drunk," Alex countered, a grin tugging at his lips. "It's avant-garde. It's a deconstructionist interpretation of a bookshelf. We're not builders, we're artists." He braced one side while I tried to hammer in a dowel that refused to align. The hammer slipped, tapping his thumb instead. "Youch. Okay, new plan." He shook his hand, laughing. "We ignore the instructions. We go rogue. We build this thing with pure, unadulterated instinct." What followed was an hour of chaotic, hilarious improvisation. We used leftover screws from other steps. We reinforced wobbly joints with scraps of cardboard from Chloe's fort. We argued playfully about which way a shelf should face, our debates punctuated by Chloe's giggles as she watched us from her cardboard castle. At one point, Alex held 2 sides together while I attempted to screw them, my tongue stuck out in concentration. The screw went in at a slight angle. "It's fine," he declared. "It adds to the character. We'll call it a design feature." The physicality of it was grounding. My hands, used to the swift, sure motions of a spatula, were now engaged in a slow, clumsy, collaborative act. There was no pressure for perfection. The goal wasn't a perfect bookshelf. The goal was the process itself. The shared frustration, the problem-solving, the simple act of creating something, however wonky, together. As we finally, miraculously, lifted the completed structure into place against the wall, it was unique. It had a slight list. One shelf was definitely higher than the other, but it stood. It was solid in its own weird way. We stood back, side by side, surveying our handiwork. The apartment was a mess of wrappers and tools, but it felt alive, lived in, and happy. "It's beautiful," Alex said, with utter sincerity. "It's the ugliest bookshelf I've ever seen," I replied, my shoulder brushing against his arm. "Exactly," he said, turning to look at me. His eyes were warm, crinkling at the corners. "It's ours. It has a story. No one else in the world has a bookshelf that looks like this. It's a testament to our refusal to be defeated by Swedish hieroglyphics." In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of our comical failure-turned-success, I understood the profound difference between building a life with Daniel and building one with Alex. With Daniel, the blueprint had been set years ago, and any deviation was a crack, a flaw, a secret to be hidden. Our marriage, I now saw, had been a beautiful, fragile facade hiding a rotten structure. With Alex, the blueprint was being drawn in real time, with laughter and misdrilled holes and design features. The process was the point. The imperfections weren't hidden, they were the very things that gave it character, that made it uniquely ours. Later, after Alex had left and Chloe was asleep, I ran my hand over the slightly crooked top of the bookshelf. I thought of Daniel's box of curated memories, still shoved in the back of my closet. That was a museum of a life that was over. This bookshelf, this ugly, wonderful, lopsided thing, was the foundation of something new. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something so compelling, so full of light and laughter, that the past simply lost its power to hurt me. I was no longer just demolishing, I was constructing. And the instructions, for the first time, were my own. The food court was a special kind of hell, a symphony of clattering trays, shrieking children, and the greasy, commingled smell of a dozen different cuisines. It was a place of transient happiness and forced civility. The perfect neutral territory, the court-mandated mediator had said. My hands, slick with sweat, were clenched around a cardboard cup of soda I had no intention of drinking. Across the Formica table, Chloe chattered excitedly to Daniel, showing him a new drawing, her small world blissfully unaware of the tectonic plates grinding against each other beneath her feet. He looked older. The confident swagger I'd known for over a decade was gone, replaced by a hunched weariness. His eyes, which had once charmed me, now held a desperate, hungry light as they flickered from Chloe to me. He was performing, his laughter at her stories a little too loud, a little too forced. She's gotten so big, Evie, he said, his voice soft, aiming for a shared moment of parental wonder. I said nothing. I just watched him, my gaze a flat, unyielding wall. I was the architect of my own silence now, and I would not let him borrow any of my materials. The exchange hour crawled by. He bought her a cheap, brightly colored slushie, his hand lingering on her hair. Every tender gesture felt like a claim staked, a flag planted on the territory of my new life. Finally, the mediator, a woman with a kind face and a tired posture, gave a nod from a nearby table. Time was up. Okay, pumpkin, Daniel said, his voice thick. Daddy has to go. I'll see you next week, okay? Okay, Daddy, Chloe chirped, hopping down and running to my side, her small, sticky hand finding mine. He stood up, his eyes finally locking with mine, the performance over. The desperation was raw and unmasked now. Evelyn, a minute, please. The mediator gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning. But I was tired of being managed, of having my interactions policed. I needed him to hear it from me directly, without the filter of lawyers or mediators. I needed to see the understanding in his eyes. Chloe, honey, go with Miss Anna for a moment, I said, my voice calm. My daughter skipped off with the mediator, leaving us alone in the buzzing chaos of the food court. The silence between us was a chasm. He took a step closer. The smell of his old cologne, once so familiar, now felt like a chemical assault. Evie, he began, his voice a low, pleading rasp. Look at this. This is a nightmare, meeting my own daughter in a mall. He spat the word out like it was poison. This isn't us, we're a family. We have a home. We had a home, Daniel, I said, my tone even, devoid of the rage he probably expected. The rage had been burned out of me, first by fire, then by the quiet, steady work of rebuilding. You burned it down. Not with a match, but with every message, every lie, every time you chose her. He flinched as if struck. It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. I'm sick, Evie. I'm getting help. I'm in therapy. They say it's a coping mechanism. Stop. The word was quiet, but it cut through his excuses like a blade. I don't care what they say. I don't care about your reasons. Your mistake had a name and a face and a history you built while you were lying to me. You don't get to pathologize your way out of betrayal. His composure began to crack. The weary sadness bled away, replaced by a frustrated anger. So that's it. You're just done? After 12 years? After a child? You're just going to throw it all away and play house with that architect. The way he said Alex's profession was a sneer, an attempt to diminish what we had. A strange sense of calm settled over me. He had shown his hand. This wasn't about remorse, it was about possession. He wasn't heartbroken that he'd hurt me, he was furious that I had stopped being his. What I do with my life is no longer your concern, I said, my voice still dangerously quiet. My house is my own to play in, and it's not built on lies. He doesn't know you. Daniel's voice rose, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. He doesn't know the real you, the you who cried when you burned your hand on the grill, the you who sings off-key in the shower. The you I built a life with. I'm the one who was there. I'm the one who knows. You knew me, I corrected him, my eyes holding his without wavering. And you used that knowledge to find the most precise ways to break me. You knew that our song would make me trust you. You knew that forgetting our anniversary would make me feel insecure. You knew exactly which buttons to push because you installed them. That doesn't make you an expert on me, Daniel. It makes you my greatest liability. The color drained from his face. He had expected tears, yelling, a scene. He had not expected this cold, forensic dismantling of his last remaining arguments. I love you, he whispered, a last, desperate gambit. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the final, definitive proof that he did not see me, not the me I had become. He saw the ghost of the woman he could control. No, you don't, I said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine pity broke through my resolve. You love the idea of me. You love the convenience of me. You love the fact that my forgiveness once made you feel like a good man. But you don't love me, because if you did, you would have never risked losing me in the first place. I turned away from him. I didn't look back. I walked towards Miss Anna and Chloe, my daughter's small, warm hand a tangible anchor in the present. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't with fear or grief. It was with the fierce, clean adrenaline of a battle finally, definitively won. As we walked out of the food court, away from the greasy smells and the ghost of my old life, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text from Alex. Alex, how did the summit with the Dark Lord go? Emergency supply of pizza and Big Trouble in Little China is standing by, if required. I looked down at my phone, then at my daughter, then out at the bright, ordinary day. I typed my reply, my fingers steady and sure. Evelyn, the walls held, demolition complete. Now for the fun part, the interior design. And yes, pizza is required. I was free. The world dissolved into a cool, blue silence. The cacophony of my life, the sizzle of the grill, the drone of the television, the incessant, anxious chatter of my own thoughts, was swallowed whole by the immense, weightless quiet of the aquarium. We were surrounded by water, by a world that moved with a languid, ancient grace that had no concept of my petty human dramas. Flickering silver shoals of fish moved as one mind, a living river against the artificial coral. A loggerhead turtle, its face etched with the wisdom of a century, paddled slowly past the thick acrylic wall, its eye seeming to hold a profound and placid understanding. Chloe's small hand was crushed in mine, her other palm pressed flat against the glass of the tunnel we stood in, her mouth a perfect, silent O of wonder. And on my other side, a solid, warm presence. Alex. His arm brushed against mine, not a claim, not a demand, but a simple, steadying point of contact. A grounding wire in the face of the sublime. This was his idea. After the food court, after the final, draining confrontation with Daniel, he had seen the brittle edge in my calm. He had seen the way my hands still trembled hours later, the adrenaline aftershock of holding my ground. You need to remember how big the world is, he'd said simply. It helps put things in perspective. So he brought us here, to the world under the world. We drifted through the bioluminescent exhibit, the only light coming from the ethereal glow of creatures that made their own sun in the crushing dark. It was like walking through a living constellation. Chloe, mesmerized, whispered, "They're like fairies, Mommy." "They are," I whispered back, my throat tight. Alex leaned down, his voice a soft rumble beside Chloe's ear. "See that one? The one that looks like a tiny, glowing spaceship. That's a comb jelly. It's not even a jellyfish. It's a whole other thing. A reminder that the world is full of wonders we haven't even begun to imagine." He wasn't just telling her a fact, he was giving her a philosophy, a blueprint for a life of curiosity and awe. I watched him with her, the easy way he had, the lack of performance. Daniel's interactions with Chloe were always tinged with a desperate, theatrical love, a constant seeking of validation. Alex's was pure. It was simply about sharing the wonder of the moment with a small, curious person. We reached the open ocean tank, a cathedral of water holding giants. Shadows moved in the deep, resolving slowly into the majestic, terrifying forms of sharks. They glided, effortless, powerful, their bodies speaking of an efficiency born of millions of years of evolution. A predator. That's what Daniel had been in the end, I realized. A predator in the ecosystem of our marriage, feeding on my trust, my loyalty, my love. But watching these actual sharks, I felt no fear. Only a strange, resonant respect. They weren't evil. They were simply being what they were, operating on an instinct I could never fully understand. The danger was inherent, a part of their truth. The betrayal hadn't been in Daniel's nature, perhaps, but in his deception of it. He had pretended to be a docile, friendly fish while hiding the teeth. Then it appeared. The whale shark. It moved with a slow, impossible grandeur. It spotted back a map of some distant galaxy, its mouth wide enough to swallow a man, yet filtering only plankton from the water. It was the largest fish in the sea, a behemoth, and yet its movement was the epitome of peace. It passed directly over us, its white belly a vast, gentle moon, blocking out the fake sun of the tank lights. A single, clear thought crystallized in my mind. as if the silent, immense creature had imparted it directly to my soul. You can be large and you can be gentle. You can be powerful and you can be at peace. The size of the hurt does not dictate the size of the healing. I felt a tear escape, tracing a warm path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness for the past. It was a tear of awe for the present, for the staggering, beautiful simplicity of this truth. The weight of the last few months, the fury, the grief, the legal battles, the fear, seemed to loosen its grip, sloughing off me like an old, dead skin, dissolving into the blue water. I didn't wipe the tear away. I felt Alex's gaze on me. I turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at the whale shark anymore. He was looking at me. His eyes held no pity, no curiosity about my tears. They held the same quiet reverence with which he'd regarded the bioluminescent jellies and the ancient turtle. He saw me, in that moment, as another wonder of this vast world. A complex, damaged, healing ecosystem worthy of quiet observation and respect. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out and his hand found mine, his fingers lacing through mine, warm and sure. It was the first time he had truly held my hand. It wasn't a question. It was an answer. Chloe, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring beside her, pointed up at the retreating form of the whale shark. "Bye, big fish," she called out, her voice echoing in the tunnel. We stood there, the three of us, hand in hand, watching the giants glide through the blue. The past was in another world, a world of air and noise and betrayal. Down here, in the quiet, among the creatures that made their own light and the giants that moved with such gentle power, I was finally building a new one. And for the first time, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that its foundations were unshakable. The key was cold and heavy in my palm, a solid, unassuming piece of metal that felt like it held the weight of a future. We stood in the sterile, echoing hallway of a newly constructed apartment building in the heart of the city. The air smelled of fresh paint, new carpet, and possibility. Alex jangled his own set of keys, a boyish grin on his face that belied the profound significance of the moment. "Unit 4 billion, he said, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. "All yours, or, well, ours, if you want it." This wasn't the cottage by the lake or the suburban house with a garden from some random parameter list. This was our choice. A deliberate, collaborative decision, born from late-night conversations over takeout, spreadsheets of budgets, and walks through different neighborhoods. We'd chosen the city. We'd chosen a modern, open-plan space with huge windows that looked out over a bustling park. We'd chosen a blank slate, a place with no ghosts, no memories, no scent of a past life. A place where the only history would be the one we wrote ourselves. I slid the key into the lock. The click was definitive, a sound more final than any judge's gavel. I pushed the door open. Sunlight, that was the first thing. It flooded the empty space, painting golden rectangles on the pristine, honey-colored hardwood floor. The room was vast and open, echoing with our footsteps. Chloe immediately broke free from my hand and ran into the center of the living area, her laughter spinning into a joyous pirouette before she collapsed in a giggling heap. "It's so big, Mommy. We can have a dance floor." I walked in slowly, my heart beating a steady, hopeful rhythm. I ran my fingers along the cool, smooth surface of a kitchen countertop that had never known the grime of a diner shift. I looked out the window at the tapestry of the city below, the moving cars like tiny toys, the people in the park like scattered seeds of life. This view wasn't an escape. It was an engagement, a promise of a life lived in the world, not hidden from it. Alex came to stand beside me, his shoulder gently pressing against mine. He didn't say anything. He just watched me take it in. He understood that this was a sacred moment, a silent baptism. My eyes fell on a small, folded piece of paper lying on the floor of the empty bedroom that would be Chloe's. I walked over and picked it up. It was a child's drawing, clearly left by a previous visitor. A stick figure family stood under a lopsided sun, holding hands. A mother, a father, a child, and a dog. The classic, uncomplicated dream. A year ago, that drawing would have been a shard of glass in my heart, a reminder of the picture I had failed to preserve. Now, I looked at it and felt nothing. No pang of loss, no bitterness. It was just a drawing. It wasn't my story anymore. My story was standing behind me. My story was a man who brought me bad movies and understood the architecture of healing. My story was a daughter who saw dance floors in empty rooms. My story was this sunlight, this new wood, this key in my hand. I turned to face Alex. Chloe had found a stray cardboard box and was already turning it into a spaceship. "It's perfect," I said, and the words were inadequate for the ocean of feeling inside me. "It's a start," he corrected softly, his eyes crinkling. "The walls are straight at least. A definite upgrade over our last collaborative building project." I laughed, the sound free and easy in the empty space. "No Swedish hieroglyphics this time." "Nope. Just us." He reached out and took my hand, his thumb tracing a slow, comforting circle over my knuckles. It was a gesture that had become our shorthand, a silent language that meant I'm here, you're safe, this is real. Later that night, after we'd celebrated with pizza on the floor, a tradition now, and after we'd tucked an exhausted Chloe into a makeshift bed of blankets and pillows, Alex and I sat on the floor of our new balcony, our backs against the glass door, watching the city lights twinkle on. The sounds of traffic and distant sirens were a urban lullaby. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," I whispered into the cool night air. This, quiet certainty. After Daniel, I thought the part of me that could trust was just gone. Severed. Alex was silent for a moment, looking out at the horizon. "You know, the most important part of any structure isn't the most visible one," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's the foundation. And a good foundation isn't just about being strong. It's about being flexible. It has to be able to shift and settle without cracking. What you had before, it was rigid. It looked strong, but it had no give. So when the earthquake came, it shattered." He turned his head to look at me. "What you're building now, Evelyn, this has give. This has flexibility. This is built to last." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were tears of recognition. He saw me. He saw the process. He didn't just see the finished, healed woman. He saw the complex, ongoing construction site, and he respected the engineering. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and his arm came around me, pulling me close. We sat there in the quiet, watching our new city sleep and wake and live around us. The key was in my pocket. The door was closed behind us. The past was a country I had no desire to ever visit again. I was home. Not a replacement home, not a rebound home. A true home. Forged not in the easy fires of infatuation, but in the respectful, patient, and powerful kiln of a love that knew how to build something new from the rubble. The smell of coffee and burnt toast had become the aroma of my salvation. It was a Saturday morning, 3 months after we'd moved into the apartment. The city was awake outside our large windows, but inside, time moved with a different, slower rhythm. This was no longer a new space. It was our home. The bookshelves, a new, sturdier set we'd assembled with only minor comical difficulties, were filled. Chloe's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. My black guitar stood proudly in a corner, a silent sentinel of my rebellion, now mostly used for quiet, melodic strumming while Alex cooked. I was at the counter, slicing strawberries, the red juice staining my fingers. The radio was playing a soft, forgotten classic rock song from the 80s. Alex was at the stove, orchestrating a precarious ballet of pancakes and sizzling bacon, wearing the ridiculously frilly apron Chloe had picked out for him. He was humming along to the song, off-key but with gusto, and then it happened. The song on the radio shifted. The opening chords of our song, mine and Daniel's, filled the room. It was the song he'd proposed to, the song we'd called ours for over a decade. A song that, for years, had the power to stop me in my tracks, to summon a wave of bittersweet nostalgia so potent it could bring me to my knees. I froze, the knife hovering over a strawberry. My breath hitched. I waited for the familiar stab of pain, the crushing weight of memory, the phantom limb ache of my old life. It didn't come. Instead, something else happened. Alex, without missing a beat in his pancake flip, began to sing along. But he wasn't singing the actual, romantic lyrics. In a deadpan, recitative voice, he was narrating the process of making breakfast. "I'm flipping pancakes, oh so high," he chanted, perfectly in time with the music, "hoping that this one won't go and die." A snort of laughter escaped me, startling in the quiet kitchen. He glanced over his shoulder, a mischievous glint in his eye, and continued. "The bacon's sizzling, a tasty sound," he crooned, "while my love for coffee is profound." Chloe, who had been coloring at the kitchen table, looked up, her eyes wide with delight. "Daddy, you're silly," she giggled. "Daddy." The word hung in the air, natural and unforced. It wasn't a title he'd demanded or a role he'd rushed. It was a gift she had given him, a testament to the countless mornings like this, the bedtime stories, the patient bandaging of scraped knees, the quiet, consistent presence that had earned him the name. The spell of the old song was completely, irrevocably broken. It was no longer our song. It was just a song. And in this kitchen, it was the soundtrack to a silly, perfect moment that belonged entirely to us. I finished slicing the strawberries, my movements light again. I brought the bowl to the table just as Alex was plating the pancakes, a stack of lopsided, golden brown discs that were more full of love than culinary perfection. We sat down to eat, the three of us. The conversation was a comfortable, chaotic tapestry. Chloe recounted a dream about flying elephants. Alex debated the merits of adding chocolate chips to the next batch of pancakes. I told a funny story about a customer at the diner. It was nothing. It was everything. This was the life I had been fighting for, not a life of grand gestures or dramatic passion, but this, the symphony of the mundane. The shared, unremarkable moments that, stitched together, created a tapestry of profound and unshakable happiness. This was the family I had chosen, built, and earned. It wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. It was a vast, beautiful upgrade. After breakfast, while Alex was doing the dishes and Chloe was back at her coloring, I walked over to my phone. I opened the music app, found the playlist I'd avoided for over a year, the one labeled Us that I'd made for Daniel. I hit play. The same song from the radio started again. Alex looked over, his hands submerged in soapy water, a question in his eyes. I smiled, walked over to him, and slipped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his back. "I just wanted to hear your version again," I murmured. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his body into mine. He began to sing again, his voice a soft, rumbling nonsense verse about battling stubborn syrup stains. I closed my eyes. The music washed over me, but it held no power anymore. The ghosts were gone, exorcised not by a grand exorcism, but by 1,000 small moments of joy, of silliness, of a love that felt less like a flame and more like the sun, constant, warm, and life-giving. The past was a closed book. This, right here, was the only song that mattered. The air in our apartment tasted different today. It wasn't just the familiar scent of coffee and clean laundry. It was charged with a quiet, profound significance, a stillness that felt like the deep breath before a blessing. The city's usual hum outside our windows seemed to have softened into a respectful murmur. I stood in the center of the living room, the same spot where, over a year ago, I had first created a violent, discordant noise with a guitar I didn't know how to play. Now, the silence was a comfortable companion, filled with the peaceful echoes of a life I had consciously built. Today was the day the adoption was finalized. The legal, binding piece of paper that would make Alex not just daddy in Chloe's heart, but in the eyes of the law. A formality, in a way, because he had already earned the title 1,000 times over in the quiet, daily moments. But formalities have power. They are the architectural details that finish a structure, the final seal that declares it sound and complete. I looked at the two of them. Alex was on the floor, helping Chloe, our daughter, put the final touches on an elaborate, wobbly tower of wooden blocks. He was explaining, with exaggerated seriousness, the principles of load-bearing dynamics, and she was listening with rapt attention, as if he were revealing the secrets of the universe. The sight of them, their two heads bent together, one dark, one fair, sent a wave of such fierce, protective love through me that it stole my breath. This was my family, not a rebound, not a consolation prize, not a replacement for something broken. It was a new creation, designed from the ground up with intention, with patience, with hard-won trust, and with a love that had been tested not by fire, but by the gentle, relentless pressure of everyday life. My journey began with the destruction of a symbol, a burning chair that represented a failed marriage. It was a necessary, violent act of severance. Then came the noise, the screaming guitar that gave voice to a pain too deep for words. That noise led me to a quiet man in a hallway, whose first gift to me was not a grand gesture, but a simple, practical solution. Headphones. A suggestion that I could contain my chaos without extinguishing it, that I could learn to hear myself again without drowning out the world. He saw the blueprint of my ruin, and instead of walking away, he handed me a pencil. He didn't try to be the architect of my recovery, he taught me how to be my own. He stood beside me as I surveyed the damage, and he never once flinched at the extent of it. He celebrated the crooked bookshelves and the comical failures because they were proof that I was trying, that I was building. I thought of Daniel sometimes, not with bitterness, but with a distant, almost clinical pity. He was a man who confused possession with love, who saw a family as a finished product to be displayed, not a living, breathing entity to be nurtured. His love had been a cage, beautifully gilded, but a cage nonetheless. What I had with Alex was a foundation. It was strong because it was flexible. It could withstand the tremors of past trauma and the stresses of daily life because it was built on the bedrock of mutual respect, unwavering honesty, and a shared sense of wonder at the ridiculous, beautiful chaos of life. Ready to go, my girls? Alex's voice cut through my reverie. He was standing now, holding out his hand to Chloe. She took it, then reached for mine. The three of us walked out of our apartment, a united front. My hand, once raw and bleeding from guitar strings, now held the hand of my daughter. My other hand was laced with Alex's, the architect who had helped me design a life I no longer needed to escape from. At the courthouse, the procedure was swift and antiseptic. A judge in black robes asked questions, we gave answers. Papers were signed. But when the judge smiled and said, "The petition is granted. The adoption is final," the sterile room seemed to bloom with an invisible, radiant light. Alex didn't whoop for joy or cry dramatically. He simply turned to Chloe, knelt down so he was at her eye level, and said, his voice thick with emotion, "It's official, kiddo. You're stuck with me." Chloe threw her arms around his neck. "I know, Daddy," she whispered. "I picked you." And in that simple, profound statement from a child, I heard the entire story arc of my life summarized. I had not been chosen by Daniel, not in any real way. He had chosen the idea of me. But Alex and Chloe, we had chosen each other, actively, deliberately, every single day. We celebrated not at a fancy restaurant, but back in our sun-drenched apartment. We built a blanket fort in the living room, our own little private kingdom, and ate pizza inside it. We were surrounded by the blueprints of Alex's latest project, scattered across the floor, and the faint, comforting smell of my guitar's wood polish. It was a perfect amalgamation of all our parts, a collage of our shared soul. As night fell and Chloe slept soundly in her room, in the home that was truly hers, Alex and I stood again on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. His arm was around me, my head on his shoulder. "It's complete," I said softly, not just meaning the adoption, but everything. The journey from the ashes of a backyard fire to this unshakable peace. He kissed the top of my head. "No, it's not," he murmured, his voice a gentle rumble in the night. "The best structures are never really finished. They're always being lived in, adapted, loved. We'll add rooms, Evie. We'll repaint the walls. We'll fill it with more laughter, more life. This isn't the end. It's the forever renovation." I looked up at him, at the man who knew every line from bad 80s movies, who could fix anything with his hands, and who had rebuilt my faith in love not with grand promises, but with a steady, patient, and unwavering presence. He was my cornerstone. And on that foundation, we had built a family that was, and always would be, rock solid.